Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we rip the mask off the economic clown show that is modern governance. I'm your host, the guy who actually reads the fine print on these trillion-dollar boondoggles, and today, we've got a doozy for you. Grab your popcorn, folks, because we're diving headfirst into the latest chapter of the US government's favorite soap opera, How to Tank an Economy in One Big Beautiful Bill. Starring none other than Donald J. Trump and his merry band of Republican yes-men, with a special guest appearance by a $36.2 trillion debt monster that just keeps growing. Spoiler alert, Moody's has already downgraded the US credit rating, and yet, here we are, debating whether to toss another $3 to $5 trillion onto the bonfire. Let's break this down from point to surface, shall we? Because, folks, this isn't just bad policy, it's economic malpractice of Olympic proportions. Let's start with the shiny object they're dangling in front of us, Trump's tax bill. Oh, it's a beauty, folks. A sequel to his 2017 tax cuts, which, as you'll recall, handed corporations and the ultra-wealthy a $1.9 trillion gift basket while the rest of us got crumbs. And now, Trump's back, cape fluttering in the wind, promising to extend those cuts, sprinkle some tax breaks on tips and overtime, and, wait for it, jack up defense spending while funding his border crackdown. Because nothing screams fiscal responsibility like borrowing another $3 to $5 trillion to pay for it all. But here's the kicker, folks, Moody's just stripped the US of its top-tier credit rating. Why? Because, and I quote, multiple administrations and Congress have shown no political will to address the nation's growing $36.2 trillion debt pile. That's right, folks, $36.2 trillion. To put that in perspective, if you stack $36.2 trillion in dollar bills, you could build a staircase to the moon and still have enough left over to wallpaper Mar-a-Lago. And yet, House Speaker Mike Johnson has the audacity to stand there, with a straight face, and say, oh, the Moody's downgrade just proves we need to pass this bill. Really, Mike? Really? This is like saying, the house is on fire, so let's pour gasoline on it to put it out. Now, I know what you're thinking, but boss, didn't Trump say this bill would make America great again? Oh, he sure did. He even took to his Truth Social platform to scream, "Congratulations Republicans," in all caps, because apparently, nothing says winning like a bill that's so divisive. 4 of his own hardliners stalled it in the House Budget Committee. But don't worry, folks, they rammed it through late Sunday night, because who needs debate when you've got a deadline and a dream? Okay, let's peel back the layers of this economic onion, shall we? Because beneath the surface of this tax bill lies a festering swamp of bad ideas, worse outcomes, and a government that's either willfully ignorant or just plain incompetent. Let's break it down, issue by issue, and see what this bill really means for you, me, and the future of this economy. First up, the debt. Folks, $36.2 trillion is not just a number, it's a ticking time bomb. According to the US Treasury, interest payments on the national debt hit $1.1 trillion in fiscal year 2024 alone. That's more than we spend on defense, Medicare, or education. And here's the scary part. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, projects that by 2034, interest payments will balloon to $1.6 trillion annually, eating up 23% of the federal budget. Now, along comes Trump's bill, which, according to nonpartisan analysts, will add another $3 to $5 trillion to the debt over the next decade. Let me put this in terms you'll understand. If the US were a household, we'd be the family that's already maxed out 10 credit cards, and now we're applying for an 11th to pay for a yacht. And here's the kicker. Republicans are divided over how to offset these tax cuts, with hardliners demanding deep cuts to Medicaid and green energy credits. But let's be real, folks, even if they slashed every social program to the bone, it wouldn't come close to covering the cost of this bill. This is not fiscal conservatism, this is fiscal insanity. Speaking of cuts, let's talk about Medicaid. According to the CBO, the spending cuts already proposed in this bill would kick 8.6 million people off Medicaid. That's 8.6 million Americans, many of them working-class families, elderly, or disabled, who would lose access to healthcare. And why? So we can extend tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. Folks, this isn't just bad economics, it's morally bankrupt. But wait, it gets worse. Republican leadership is now debating new work requirements for Medicaid recipients. Because apparently, if you're poor, sick, and struggling, the solution is to make you jump through more bureaucratic hoops to prove you deserve healthcare. Meanwhile, the top 1% of earners, who already saw their tax bills slashed by an average of $48,000 a year under the 2017 cuts, are laughing all the way to the bank. Oh, and let's not forget the hypocrisy here. Remember when Trump promised during his campaign that he wouldn't touch Medicare or Social Security? Well, surprise, surprise, Medicaid is now fair game, and if this bill passes, it's only a matter of time before they come for the rest of the safety net. Next up, the SALT deduction cap. For those of you who don't speak tax nerd, SALT stands for state and local taxes, and it's a deduction that lets people write off state and local taxes on their federal returns. Back in 2017, Trump's tax bill capped this deduction at $10,000, which hit high-tax states like New York and California hard. Now, some Republicans from those states are begging Trump to raise the cap, because apparently, their wealthy constituents are feeling the pinch. Here's the irony, folks, the same Republicans who claim to be all about small government and personal responsibility are now fighting tooth and nail to protect a tax break that primarily benefits high earners in blue states. Meanwhile, the average American is still waiting for that trickle-down magic to kick in. Spoiler alert, it never does. According to the Tax Policy Center, the top 20% of earners captured 65% of the benefits from the 2017 tax cuts, while the bottom 20% got just 4%. But sure, let's keep pretending this is about helping the little guy. Oh, and let's not forget the hardliners' push to repeal green energy tax credits. Because who needs a planet when you've got tax cuts, right? Folks, the US is already lagging behind China and Europe in clean energy investment. According to the International Energy Agency, global clean energy investment hit $1.8 trillion in 2023, with China alone accounting for $676 billion. Meanwhile, the US spent just $303 billion, and now, Republicans want to get the one tool we have to incentivize private sector investment in renewables. This isn't just bad for the environment, it's bad for the economy. The clean energy sector employs over 3 million Americans, according to the US Department of Energy, and it's growing 2.5 times faster than the overall economy. But hey, why invest in the future when you can cling to the past and keep subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of $20 billion a year? And finally, let's talk about the cherry on top of this economic sundae, more defense spending and funding for Trump's border crackdown. Now, don't get me wrong, national security is important, but folks, the US already spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, US military spending hit $916 billion in 2023, accounting for 37% of global military expenditures. And yet, here we are, debating whether to pour even more money into the Pentagon while 8.6 million Americans lose healthcare. As for the border crackdown, it's the same old song and dance, scare tactics to justify bloated budgets. Never mind that net migration at the US-Mexico border has been near zero for years, according to the Migration Policy Institute, or that immigrants, documented or not, contribute $2 trillion annually to the US economy, per the American Immigration Council. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good campaign slogan? Alright, folks, let's zoom out and look at the big picture here. What we're witnessing is a government that's completely out of touch with the realities of everyday Americans. While families are struggling to afford groceries, with inflation still hovering around 3% according to the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and while 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency expense, per the Federal Reserve, our leaders are busy fighting over tax cuts for the rich and cuts to the poor. And let's not forget the timing of this debacle. They're rushing to pass this bill before the Memorial Day holiday, because apparently, nothing says honoring our veterans like slashing healthcare for the poor and borrowing another $5 trillion to pay for tax cuts. Oh, and let's give a shout out to the House Rules Committee, which is holding a hearing at 1 a.m. on Wednesday to ram through changes to this bill. Because who needs transparency when you've got a majority to protect? Folks, this isn't just bad policy, it's a masterclass in bad governance. And the worst part? The ordinary Americans watching this clown show at home are the ones who'll pay the price. Higher debt, worse healthcare, a gutted safety net, and a planet that's cooking faster than a microwave burrito. So, what's the solution? Well, for starters, how about a government that actually prioritizes the people over politics? How about a tax policy that doesn't just funnel money to the top while leaving the rest of us to fight over scraps? And how about a little accountability for the folks who keep driving this economy off a cliff? But hey, don't hold your breath, folks. Because as long as we've got leaders who think fiscal responsibility means borrowing trillions to pay for tax cuts, we're stuck in this economic Groundhog Day. And until we, the people, demand better, the clowns will keep running the circus. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this episode, smash that like button, subscribe, and share it with every hardworking American who deserves better than this mess. And remember, here at Boss Economics World, we're not just watching the economy, we're calling out the madness, one bad bill at a time. See you next week.